Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we're going to be taking a look through the Museum of Brands, which is in London. Now the collection is pulled from the collection of this man here, Robert Opie. Now Robert Opie is an incredible collector, really. I would say he's probably unique. He managed to squirrel away all this packaging and promotional items and display items, long before it was fashionable to sort of collect this sort of stuff, and he's preserved it all these years, and no doubt it's had a lot of lucky finds and been gifted stuff, but wow, what a collection this is. And you might be familiar with the scrapbook series, which he published throughout the 90s. They're still in print today, and that's where he would concentrate on sort of a decade, like the 20s, the 30s, the wartime years. There's like one on raw commemoratives and souvenirs, and this is basically items pulled from his collection. Now, when I went into the museum, I was speaking with the duty manager, and she said this is literally just 10% of Robert's collection. So you can imagine what it must look like. It must be in a warehouse, is all I can say. But the way the museum is designed, it starts with the very earliest items, which are the Victorian ones, which you're seeing here, and it works its way right up to virtually the present day. Then there is like a special collections and a revolving display, which comes in sort of month in, month out, which changes, and that's in a big area, which we'll have a look at what was on display this time round at the very end. There's also a fantastic cafe and a gift shop, and even an outdoor garden as well for you to enjoy, so it's quite a lot to see. Now the video, as you'll soon see, there's just so much in here to try and capture, and even with a video you're going to get a taste of what it's like there, but it's just not the same as actually visiting. So if you get a chance, I very, very much encourage you to go to the Museum of Brands. It's only £10. I was in there for probably 2.5, almost 3 hours. I was a little pushed for time, but I felt I could have easily stayed even longer than that, because there is just so much to take in and behold. And if you stop in front of every cabinet and really study it and read all the notes and information about the items, you could easily be there best part of a day. But suffice to say, well, you can just see the pictures are worth 1,000 words, that I can say. But there were certainly some bits which I found more enjoyable than others, just because that's what my interests are. I had to marvel at all this early Cadbury stuff, having been to the Cadbury's exhibition at Bourneville in Birmingham. Robert Opie's got far more on display, and it's original rather than what's actually on display in the Cadbury's museum. They could take a page or two out of his book and take a look at this, and there was a few areas I thought, wow, this is better than I've seen in other museums. Certainly when we get onto the First World War memorabilia, the posters and the things like that, the bits and pieces that came from that era, I thought the display of stuff that was out today when I visited was better than what I'd seen at the Imperial War Museum, and that is saying something, because that's an incredible museum. But the actual layout, as you can see, it's got these huge display cases, basically floor to ceiling, and it's a bit like a maze, so you work your way around and work through time, basically. The actual museum is quite dark, with the cabinets themselves providing the light to walk around, so the video you might find a little dark in places, but I didn't want to film it with a flash on. I think it would just look a bit garish. But as I said, I'm not going through every single cabinet. There's stuff I have skipped over, but at the same time, you're getting to see what I believe to be some of the highlights that are there for you to enjoy, and boy oh boy, what a lot there is. Absolutely fantastic. This very, very early stuff doesn't have a massive amount of interest to me until sort of the First World War stuff comes in, but still fascinating to see. One thing throughout the museum was the collection of biscuit tins. Absolutely astonishing. It has to be one of the best in existence. I just don't think there's anything that could be better. It's absolutely phenomenal. The same with like early copies of the Radio Times, which we'll see dotted around, which fit into the decades as soon as radio gets introduced. Sweet packets and sweet wrappers as well, absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure he's got more in the way of toys and jigsaws and stuff, but there's loads here for you to see later on when those start to become popular. Old medicines and things like that. I don't know if he's got much pre-Victorian era. I'm sure he's got bits and pieces in his collection which have come his way. But it was we went there on a Thursday morning, and literally they just opened the doors at 10 in the morning. We booked tickets in advance so that you can book them online. So you just go to the Museum of Brands website. It's really interactive, and you get a taste of what's there. I believe they've also got a Facebook page as well. And it was £10 per adult for entry, which I thought was very, very good value for money, considering this is London. And if this is the sort of stuff you're into, well, it's £10 very well spent. But there were so many bits that you might have seen. If you're into this sort of stuff, you may have seen the odd piece at a toy fair or previously in a museum. But when you start to see it collected together, boy oh boy, it really does make a difference. I remember thinking that when I saw the cabinet of Dan Dare stuff, which we'll see later on. It really, really sets it off. So here we are. So it's 1910s, so it starts with the Royal Coronation, and then this will then lead into the outbreak of the First World War. I was with my partner, and I kept pointing stuff out there, and she was rolling her eyes. Fantastic to see those old tins. I just love the old packaging. So here we are. So this is the sort of the start, just creeping in, of the First World War sort of patriotic merchandise that started to get produced. All part of the war effort, encouraging men to enlist, that sort of thing. Then cartoons for men on the front. We'll see some Bruce Barnfather as well. Another area which I found particularly amazing was the museum's display of old jigsaw puzzles throughout the ages. Absolutely incredible. A few I'd never ever seen before, didn't even know they existed. And some really, really nice choice examples of some later ones, 50s and 60s ones, which we'll see later on. These are very nice. These are some of the patriotic First World War boys' own style books. There were some lovely early glass-topped dexterity puzzles, which I'm a particular fan of. There was some of the Beresford boys' own style novels, which are quite good fun to collect. There's fragments from France. Some of the very rare dolls there. I mean, how rare are those? And the jigsaw. I mean, just incredibly, incredibly rare. And don't forget, all the stuff we're looking at here is over 100 years old now. Yeah, the stuff that was on display in that cabinet there is better than what's at the Imperial War Museum, in my opinion. There's nothing like that there, even when they had their sort of dedicated First World War display. Very, very nice indeed. Yeah, I do love those early puzzles. Good stuff. Celebrating then the end of the war. And then leading into the early 1920s, the birth of film. The silent movies, of course. And then with that, the introduction of things like Picture Show, Film Weekly, Film Fun, all tying into the silent stars of the era. And their related memorabilia. That was a cabinet of Pip and Squeak stuff, which you hardly ever see now. But to see, once again, so much of it all together in one place, absolutely astounding. I mean, really, really great. Something that would take decades to collect if you tried to do it now. Some more sort of patriotic stuff here, post-war, post-First World War. And there was a sort of a mini consumer boom around this time. The British exhibition. This was lovely, some early Beatrix Potter jigsaws and related bits and pieces. Once again, incredibly rare, very, very collectible as well. Beautiful to see that sort of stuff there. Early games, and once again the board game selection is just astounding. Fantastic stuff. A few bits and pieces that would be considered a little bit questionable now are on display, sort of things with like gollywogs on, for example, which there was nothing wrong with it back in the 1910s and 20s, but it's considered non-PC these days. I also spotted a Rolf Harris stylophone and a Jim will Fix It game, even an It's a Knockout game, all of questionable origin these days. And I don't know, it's part of our history, so should they be on display there? I don't know. Make your own mind up for that, but they were out on display as part of British brand history. And it is worth pointing out that it is very much British brands that are celebrated here, not an American one, or not American brands. I guess that would be a museum in itself. Although there were a few American versions of things. So when we look at the Star Wars figures, when we get up to the 1970s, I noticed some of them were Kenner, so rather than Palitoy. So their origins were definitely overseas rather than in the UK. But that's not to say they weren't sold over here, because some of the Kenner stuff was. So it was getting imported to meet demand. So the early days of radio now as well. Quite a bit of BBC stuff was dotted around, and as I said, lots and lots of copies of the Radio Times. He must have a virtual full run. All beautiful copies of them. Very, very nice indeed. This is nice. Some of these cardboard standees and the mini counter display tops, they are gorgeous. Absolutely lovely to behold. Beautiful. As I said, the biscuit tins, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've had a few through my hands, like 60s ones, which were really nice. But these, and we'll see more at the end, there's just like a wall full of them. Just astounding. I mean, it's almost a museum in itself. I do love these, all these little tins of chocolate and things like that. It's just amazing. Absolutely amazing. Another thing he's got is an astounding collection of old radios and wireless sets. I mean, we'll see towards the end, when you walk towards the loos, outside the cafe, there's 4 massive display cases, huge, stocked with old radio sets. Absolutely astounding to see. What a collection. And there's a couple of sections in here where they've got small transistor radios as well. One cabinet's got basic small transistors, and then there's another one with novelty radios. Once again, superb. When you get a group of them together, they do look fantastic. And I suppose, this is all stuff before even my parents were born. My dad was born in 1937, so this would have been the stuff around when he was born. You sort of see the birth of cereals around this time as well. I haven't shown this to my dad yet, but I think it would be of interest to him. He definitely remembers some of it, and my mum as well. Some more of the old vintage sweets there, fantastic to see. But as a general rule, I think the collection really comes into its own when you start to see stuff that you remembered when you were younger. So for me, that kicks in the 1970s. So this is, as much as I find these earlier decades absolutely fascinating, and just look at that, it's what a great picture that makes. It is the later stuff, the stuff that you actually remember from the day, that you get the most sort of enjoyment out of. Although I do love, as I said, I love all the earlier decades as well, just to see it. It's part of our history, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant to see. I suppose, looking through the Robert Opie books, when you see the displays and they're beautifully laid out, you can see that each picture has taken hours to be laid out really, really neatly. The display cases aren't quite as neatly displayed. Some of them are absolutely outstanding, like the one we saw just now with the early cereals. Others I thought could probably do with a bit of tweaking, and maybe they're work in progress sometimes. I think a few of them possibly were, where they've been adding some bits to it and it just needs a little bit of a rearrangement. I noticed some of the jigsaws that have been done, some of the pieces had sort of fallen out and things like that, but it doesn't take anything away from the gorgeousness that we were looking at here. Yeah, lots of copies of the Radio Times there, early ones, and more actual radio sets. It's a nice drinks cabinet full of period bottles and that. I said lots of board games and jigsaws. Another early glass-topped dexterity puzzle there, which I love those. Yeah, you see lots of these. A few of them have been like re-released in modern years. This display case here was full of early Walt Disney memorabilia, mainly Mickey Mouse and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from the 1930s. That really kicked in around this era, and a lot of this, from what I can see, it's all the British versions of it. So it's all homegrown British memorabilia, which is scarce in the States now, of course. A few bits and pieces I recognise, some of the jigsaws. I've seen the set of the dwarfs before, the Seven Dwarfs. Yeah, good stuff. I do vaguely remember having like a Mickey Mouse jigsaw, one very similar to the one I saw there from the 30s. That was quite nice. I couldn't quite make out what that underground board game was, but it looked pretty interesting. Here's some of the more classic games. Often very simplistic, but no less great to look at. Here's some early gardening books here, encouraging people to do their own gardening. This was amazing. That was a jigsaw for the Universal King Kong movie. How amazing is that? That was something I never knew existed. Got some early toy cars now coming in, some tin ones, rather than die-cast. And now we're leading up to the introduction of the Second World War. This is on the ARP, Home Guard, air raid precautions. Another interesting subject which I'm quite interested in. A couple of old penguins dotted around. There wasn't a lot in the way of books, to be honest, and very little in the way of paperbacks. I mean, that could be virtually a museum in itself, but you could have had a display case going through the introduction of paperbacks in the 1930s up to, say, 2000. I think, that's something I could do myself. This is quite nice. This has got the first Giles annual there, plus some of the Laugh With booklets, which Giles was published in before the annuals became a thing. So they're quite nice to see. So they're early wartime publications. Very much wartime magazines now. Britain is at war. And not a lot in the way of comics. There was like a wartime issue of the Dandy there. I know he's got them all because they're in his book. At least certainly the early ones, like the #1 issues and that. But there wasn't a lot on display. A handful dotted here and there, really. Wartime bits and pieces, stuff aimed at the children that was produced during the war, often had a war theme to it. The Siegfried line. I think that must be the Siegfried line game. Some more 40s chocolates, and obviously this was a time of rationing, and things like chocolate were very much in short supply and rationed, so packaging became very plain, as you can see with these examples here. Things were not that lavish until we got out the other side of the war, and things started to improve a bit. But wartime, things were tough. More beautiful display cases. I would love these display cases for my own stuff. I mean, it would just be heaven to have these massive, massive glass cases where you could lay all your stuff out on. It would just be a collector's dream, wouldn't it? It really, really would. But who's got space for that, eh? And imagine if Robert Opie's complete collection was on display. You'd need 10 museums this size, dotted around the country to put it all out, which would be that would be a tour and a half, wouldn't it? Some Olympic bits and pieces. Moving on, you can see the other cabinets there. More early radio sets. Radio starts to come into its own. Well, it really did. Everyone was paid a close attention to the radio during the war. It was the source of the news. Now we're on to the 1950s, which kicked off in 1951 with the Festival of Britain. Absolutely fantastic. All the memorabilia related to that. And he had a whole display case, which I was incredibly jealous of, because I very much like the festival designed leaflets and magazines and things like that. So it's superb. There's jigsaws, posters, postcards. I love it all. Badges. Got a little spoon there. Comics and magazines of the time highlighting the festival that week. I mean, just superb. He had some really nice jigsaws there as well. Guinness poster there. That was the Emmett Festival Railway. That was very, very nice. I've never seen that one before. Yeah, good stuff. Then we got the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, which was a massive, massive event and a real tonic for the nation. Lots and lots of stuff was produced for that. And then we start to get a little bit of space creeping into it. Science fiction, of course, had been around for a while, but we do start to see it become part of popular culture. I wasn't sure what that Zoo Quest was. That was the David Attenborough series. Some early television sets now, 1950s TV. We got the start of the space race, so things start to heat up in that department. We got our early EPs, a few LPs and singles from the late 1950s. Nice jukebox there. Very, very nice indeed. And another period 50s drinks cabinet, full of period late 50s drinks. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Then some more board games. These are 50s into the very early 60s board games. There's a painting set. Richard Green, Robin Hood, Cannonball, Hawkeye. A few obscure, a few rare games there. Ones that you don't often see. Sleeping Beauty, Gun Law. Said loads more games and memorabilia. We're starting to come up to the really juicy bits in my eyes now. So we've got the 50s space stuff, which was all the rage back then, of course. Just space in general. The era of Sputnik. And that's what these next few cabinets represent. This is the Dan Dare cabinet. I spent a few minutes looking at this lot, I can tell you. Wow. And it's funny because at the shows you see the odd Dan Dare piece now and again, and it's nothing that special. But when you get a cabinet of it displayed like this all together, it really does look fantastic. And I think you'll agree this was a pretty nice glimpse of mid-1950s Dan Dare. Wow. Good stuff, eh? Yeah, very, very nice indeed. And we're sort of moving on to the late 1950s. Some of the sort of generic toys that were out back then. See some Noddy. Some of the Western series as well, which were all the rage. So we had a little Western boom in the late 1950s. Westerns were very, very popular. And those are represented with some British memorabilia. A few more old favourites there. That's the Nautilus from the Disney one. The Bonanza game. Beat the Clock. There's the Bilko game. A few more Bell board games up there. Third Man. I said lots and lots of jigsaws, and we'll see even more of the board games rather. And we'll see even more of those at the end. Army game there, which one I'd not seen before. Now we're into the very early 1960s. Sweets and chocolates. Very, very nice. A few more recognisable brands there. They're obviously still around today. The shop display standees and the packaging, these are just incredible. Absolutely incredible. You would say if you saw it was a museum piece. Well, here they are in a museum, and boy oh boy do they look good. There were footstools. Look at that, Muffin the Mule. There's a Hank footstool. The Flower Pot Men, incredible, absolutely incredible. There's early Andy Pandy, Sooty and Sweep. The early children's stars. Then we got, what's that? Robin Hood, Davy Crockett, Wagon Train. A few more of the Western series there. Watch with Mother stuff. Then the Westerns, Dixon and Doc Green. Ask Pickles. Never heard of that one. Yes. Very, very nice to see this stuff. And some period magazines from the period. Not John Bull, not a magazine I'm familiar with. Then we got a few more board games. There's a little Mousetrap game, which is one I picked up fairly recently at Toy Fair. I'm starting to get to see stuff that I've had through my hands or I own now, which is quite nice. Some of this stuff. Classic games there. Some early Lego. It was nice to see. So all the little bits of Lego. There was a Matchbox Carousel, full up of course. Absolutely beautiful condition, old shop display. Cool, I'd love one of those. Great stuff. Early Spirograph. Twister. Amazing stuff. And here we are, moving on to the 1960s. With lots of the TV tie-in stuff. A Man from U.N.C.L.E. And this is sort of dotted around a bit all over the place, but it just looks fantastic altogether. There is one particular piece that stood out an absolute mile, which was not from the 1960s. It was very much at 1977, and I did have to point it out to the woman on the way out. But see if you can spot it. Answers in the comments down below. Which bit, coming up in a while, was not from the 1960s? While we look at this great selection of Jerry Anderson stuff, early Anderson, Doctor Who, some nice Doctor Who bits there. Nice to see the Jerry Anderson lolly wrappers as well. Major Matt Mason. I'm sure you've seen all the books before, but that doesn't take anything away from them. A couple of Wall Scarre books there as well, one open, one shut. More great jigsaws, Saint, Captain Scarlet. Supercar. I've had that Batman Swoops Down game. I remember finding one of them at a boot sale in the good old days. A few James Bond bits and pieces. Connery doll. So these are 60s sweets and cakes. Absolutely incredible seeing some of this packaging. It really, really is. Well, look at that. The variety packs, with sealed variety packs with the Captain Scarlet and the Star Trek Sugar Smacks in. Astounding. They got to be unique. I can't imagine any others have survived like that. The packets themselves are in the hundreds and hundreds of pounds, yet to have them sealed like that, amazing. There's the lovely Joe 90 Sugar Smacks as well. Just incredible. Absolutely incredible. Flintstones Ice Biscuits, another rarity. Little pile of Brook Bond tea albums, and these early yogurt pots and that. Once again, how they've survived, it's just astonishing, really. This was a cabinet full of World Cup 1966 memorabilia. World Cup Willie was his name. Lovely to see it all together. Once again, a really nice themed display case, that. For what was a couple of months back in 1966. chocolate boxes, gift boxes. Lots and lots of it as well. There's more Anderson memorabilia. Another whole display case full of it. That poster's great, isn't it? Screams 1960s. Yeah, some very, very nice stuff there. We were looking out for the 1970s fuzzy felt, but there wasn't actually one on display. So maybe that's... I'm sure he must have them, but there wasn't a fuzzy felt there. Lovely Give a Show projector there for Thunderbirds. Beautiful one, that. Yeah, these display cases, they're just knockout. And some pop-related jigsaws. There's a Monkeys one there. Rolling Stones, I don't see those very often. Dr. Kildare, Avengers. All very, very rare jigsaws, these. Just don't really see them around anymore. And when you do, they're a few £100 a pop. Even the Steptoe one, I'd not seen that one before. Steptoe and Son jigsaw. Cigarette packets, not loads of cigarette packets. I guess not so much of interest these days to people, but there was a few period ones dotted around. Lovely seeing these box sets of Cadbury's Roses and Quality Street. Amazing, really. Absolutely amazing. Nice Smarties bus as well. That was really cool. He must have had a job over the years keeping all this stuff preserved, and in nice condition. This was sort of 60s domestic products. Cleaning products. Omo, Persil, Daz. This was the 60s transistor radios, little pocket radios. These are like generic brand ones, as opposed to novelty ones, which we'll see later on. Very, very nice to see those. And then we got the early sort of portable TV sets, portable record players, with nice iconic LPs and singles dotted around them of the period. Very, very nice. Some timeless stuff there. The platform shoes and boots. But this is more sort of the late 60s sort of psychedelic stuff coming in now. That sort of era. Lovely Pepsi poster, that. Look at that. That's cracking, isn't it? That is really something. And then, of course, the TV times coming in along the radio times. This was a little display case with Beatles memorabilia in. I honestly thought there would be a bit more than what was actually in here. I mean, don't get me wrong, the stuff he's got is great. I just think there was room for more, and he must have more, I'm certain of it. But, yeah, it's nice to see, all the same, but I think there must be more out there that's in his collection that he hasn't dug out. Because there was an awful lot produced, but still very nice to see. Then we got the introduction of decimalisation. So that's when we lost our pounds, shillings and pence and went into the decimal era. This is joining the common market. A few more period books and bits and pieces. Some political stuff, and the introduction of punk rock with a nice little run of Sex Pistols related stuff down the bottom there, and new wave. Good to see. A few more 70s black and white tellies and your platform shoes. Some 70s classics. Kate Bush, Queen, Slade. And the shoes, a little bit reflective there. And the cabinet next, it's got some period 70s magazines. I guess these are sort of mid-70s, aren't they, looking at them? Sally there, number 1, really nice. Looking, Jackie, Jackpot. Nice photo play there with a Live and Let Die Roger Moore on. A few more cans of beer. Some more period jigsaws there. So it's a bit of 70s stuff now, early 70s. Early to mid 70s. Jim Will Fix It, Doctor Who. Got the Cindy stuff. Sweeney, The Saint. $6 Million Man. Nationwide, that was quite interesting to see. The Muppets. Wombles. A couple of bits of Blue Peter. A Paddington game there, that was quite nice. The Marmalade Mischief game, never seen that before. These were the novelty 70s transistor radios. Fantastic, these are really nice. I think the only one I ever had was a Radio 1 Roadshow one, which is long gone now. Nice to see. A couple of early video tape decks and a trill phone. Or is it trim phone? Trill phone? Trim phone? Yeah, and a couple of old videos. Brilliant. Yeah, more jigsaws. I said the jigsaws literally everywhere in board games. Fantastic to see, and they're so visual. A couple of Busby bits there. Who remembers Busby? And more 70s fag packets. And beer. More amazing cereal boxes. The big Star Trek one. There's a Magic Roundabout one. There's a UFO one, which I don't think I've ever seen before. And look at the top. There was a Doctor Who mini John Pertwee one still sealed as well. You might need to go back on that one. I wish I'd lingered on that a little bit longer. But fantastic to see this. The early moose pots and the yogurt pots, just astounding that they've been saved, you know. And the cans, early cans, they're brilliant, aren't they? Really, really nice. Now, we'll see a few in a minute, which is old crisp packets, but I didn't see that many, and I don't remember seeing that many throughout the ages, so I don't know a lot about crisp packets when they actually kicked in, but there are some on display. There's a few there. But I thought we would have seen a bit more of that at the museum, and there wasn't. So whether they just didn't have the room for them, or they'd done them as a special display recently, I don't know. So this was for the Queen's Silver Jubilee of 1977. Remember this very well myself. Similar to the 50th anniversary a few years back. But the Silver Jubilee was definitely a big deal. Street parties and what have you. From when I was a kid, I remember it very, very well. Good stuff. Then we move on to the 70s toys, some of the most collectible bits, I suppose, in the entire museum. These early Palatoy Star Wars. Obviously, I can't see if they're 12 or 20 backs, but there they are. Nice Mego Star Trek Mr. Spock, a few more. But you see, one of those is like a Kenner one. The R2-D2 is a Kenner, so it's obviously the American edition rather than the Palatoy, which are far, far scarcer. But lovely examples. Whether they were bought at the time, I don't know. I think they probably would have been. And some of the 12-inch toys. Nice 1970s Japanese robots, plastic robots. And nice little shelf of the Star Trek hands, which do look great when they're all out in a run. But yeah, the Star Wars stuff was lovely to see, and I don't know if that's his entire collection or what, really. Some Doctor Who. I was surprised not to see a Tom Baker doll, because that's quite common, and it would have fitted in really well with that display case, and he must have one, because it's not a difficult piece to find. But nice to see the second issue of the Enterprise with the window box for the Corgi Enterprise, or is it a Dinky? I think it's a Dinky, isn't it? But yeah, lovely to see. I spent a bit of time looking at that. There's a little chopper bike from the 70s. I had the smaller version, which was the Tomahawk, but same company. There's the questionable It's a Knockout game, which we'll skirt over. That Jules game there. More Spirograph. Mastermind had to make an appearance, didn't it? Basil Brush. And the Evel Knievel stunt bike and the caravan at the top. Classic 70s action. Generation game. Some 70s TV cops. Starsky and Hutch, Kojak. Charlie's Angels with the dolls there. Got the stylophone on display. Then we got The Wedding of Charles and Diana. It was 1981. It's easy to forget what a big deal that one was as well. Everyone given the day off work, glued round the TV set watching it live. And some early 80s domestic products. And even this is like 40 years old now. But I would imagine, I mean, I don't know how old Robert Opie is, but he must have been picking this stuff up and saving it at the time, I would think. Incredible to see. Yeah, good stuff. A few more lolly wrappers and things. And then we're moving on to the, well, I suppose 83, 82, 83, we started getting the decent home computers. I suppose it kicked off in the ZX80 for 1980, then the ZX81. But we've got the early Commodore machines here, some of the early LED machines, aping the arcade machines of the time. Got like Simon and there's Cue Ball. There was just one Nintendo Game & Watch, which I was surprised at, and it wasn't boxed. It was a really common Mario Brothers one. So a lot of the British home computers are represented, Commodore and Spectrum. Commodore and Sinclair, rather. I think there was a Dragon in there. But some of the early consoles, like the early Nintendo NES, for example, just wasn't there, which I was astounded at, considering it sold so many. And I think when you get into the mid to late 80s, early 90s is when you start to see a few holes in the collection, and I have a feeling Robert Opie may have actively sort of stopped collecting around that time. I don't know for sure, but I just get that, you just sort of get that feeling going around the museum. This is obviously 80s stuff. There was a distinct lack of like Masters of the Universe, Transformers, He-Man, you know, that sort of stuff was just not there, which when you look back on it now, it should be at least represented. Maybe it's just, you know, it will come out to give a better representation in the future, but it wasn't on display there, and you thought there would have been at least a Transformer there, or at least a He-Man figure of some sort, and Thundercats, because it was a lot of you know, it was a big part of some children's childhood. Trying to remember if I even saw any Turtles. I remember how big that was, and the Power Rangers. But there you are, you know, you can see packed cabinets. Here's some 80s pop mags and albums. Into the very late 80s, early 90s now. Early Simpsons pair of trainers, I don't see those very often. There was an issue of Nintendo Power, and there was an odd Tamagotchi. Some of these other bits, well, I don't know. You know, I'm not so sure. It's a difficult decade to put a finger on, because maybe there hasn't been enough time passed yet. And these are interesting. These are old bubble baths or soakies, figural in a lot of cases. Whole display case of those. And they do look great all together if you collect them. I've got at least 2 or 3 in my collection that were there. And some of the boy bands, and we're on to some of the 90s stuff now. So we got The Death of Diana, and Teletubbies and early Jurassic Park, the revival of Action Man. But there wasn't any early Action Man. Did you notice that in the 60s? There wasn't any 60s Action Man, or 70s for that matter. A few more sort of 90s crisp packets and the early tubs of margarine and things like that. 90s cereals. So I'd say towards the end of the 90s, yeah, sort of the 90s upwards, it does get a little bit more patchy, I think, and maybe it's a work in progress. Sometimes you need the hindsight of, say, 20, 30 years to then go back and think, well, we really need to represent that because it's something which is historic, but we didn't maybe realise it at the time. Like those, as I said, those early Nintendo games consoles, for example. Zig and Zag, who remembers them? Nice to see the early Toy Story stuff. Yeah, it's good to see. Definitely very popular in its day, and toys are still around. Then we got sort of the girl power, Spice Girls. And that was very much a moment in history, wasn't it, when the Spice Girls were very, very popular. And the mid-90s revival of Star Wars and Phantom Menace. Heading towards the end of the 90s, into the 2000s now. And the early Olympics for the early 2000s, which is a big deal in the UK. And some of the boy bands, like One Direction, you sort of forget how popular they really were. And Despicable Me, well, and Disney Princess, all going to be part of people's childhoods growing up in the future. And see, to me, this just seems a little bit more recent to me, even though even all this that we're looking at now is 20 years old, so it does deserve to be preserved in the museum. But this very much was the very last couple of cabinets before you went out to the end of the formal sort of museum that you walk around. But then there's so much else to see. So this is right next to the cafe where they did some fantastic coffee and cake, just so you know. So after all that gulping at the collectibles and the display cases, we were ready for a nice cup of coffee. And this is the amazing transistor radio and radio set collection. I mean, just incredible. Look at them all. I mean, it could be a museum in its own right. Absolutely astounding, in all honesty. Really, really incredible. Yes, absolutely amazing to see. Huge old sets, but before the advent of television, this is what was in every single household. Now, this is the bit which is almost like the special collections. It's an area within the museum which changes apparently fairly regularly, every month or so, with different themed displays. So I did have a quick look around here because it was all extra stuff. This is some very, very modern packaging. Then you've got a display case. Well, there's some more biscuit tins. Look at that. Absolutely amazing. All old biscuit tins, just astonishing. And yeah, packaging innovations those were. Now what they do later on, which I found fantastic, was they've got one particular brand and they show how the packaging has changed from the earliest days through to the modern day. It's nice, just old bottles from all sort of different eras. A lot of the more recent Alco Pops, I mean, quite a wide variety of those in existence. Some early medicines and Brillo pad. Yes, this is it. So like, there's the very early like Anodin paracetamol, and lots of different packaging designs from the early days up to the latest, and the way they do this is just fantastic. Early imperial leather and talc, just incredible. Those were nice. The old bubble bath matey from the very earliest ones, I remember that, the little blue one on the end, right the way through to the much more colourful ones today. They're just fantastic. I really like the way that was done. Really, really good. And this area was much better lit than the actual main exhibit, because it's just in a different area, and there was a lot more natural light coming in rather than the artificial light. There's Pear's soap and McLean's toothpaste. Pretty amazing. Your Brill cream. Andrew's liver salt. That's not one I know. Evidently it still seems to be going today. Your Vosine shampoo. Amazing, eh? Very, very nice. I love it. I love that sort of stuff. You know, going through time like that. One I'd really like to see in detail would be HP Sauce. One of my favourite brands, and a history of that would be really something. There is stuff in the museum for HP Sauce dotted around, but it'd be nice to see it all pulled together like this. That would be really something. And some of this is just incredible. Condensed milk, look at it all. Absolutely amazing, and multiples of some of it as well, which is extra amazing to see, really. Maxwell House. Your sugar. And plastic bowls, early Coronas. The history of all bran. And Cadbury's milk tray. And there's the Rose's lime cordial. Kiora. A few Guinness bits there, early Guinness cans and bowls. Very, very nice. Highly collectible Guinness stuff. Lots of bowls there, look at that lot. Purcell. Once again, you see how a brand has changed there. Really, really great. This really great add-on to the museum. Windoline. Brasso. And Fairy Liquid. I think there was some more of that actually in the main display as well, but you get an idea. The different Purcells, just amazing. And Ritz crackers and Sunpat peanut butter. I think the next bit was the little fridgy milkshake bowls. Wowee, look at these. Absolutely brilliant, really colourful as well. I can sort of see, I would imagine there must be people out there collecting these, I would imagine, because there's so many different designs. There's all the Simpsons ones, of which I've got a couple in my collection. I don't know what year they date from, but look at those. They're great fun, aren't they? And I would imagine after visiting the museum or even watching this video, you're going to be looking twice at some of the packaging and maybe thinking you ought to pack a couple of bits away. Certainly I've been doing that since the late 80s. Then we had another wall, a wall full of more fantastic board games. A few Matchbox cards there, a few earlier ones, and Dinky. But yeah, look at this, it's just great. Johnny Staccato game. There's lots there, isn't there? And the lady was working on a similar display case to this right next to it, but it was a work in progress, so I didn't film that one. But yeah, more brilliant board games. Now, outside the cafe, there is an outside area, so if the weather's nice, you can just go outside and have your coffee in the sun. And very nice it was too, quite a large garden. So, yeah, brilliant to see. And even in the cafe, there's display cases all over the place with stuff for you to have a look at, so you're entertained while you're drinking your coffee. And then the inevitable gift shop, of which all the Robert Opie books are on sale, which I highly, highly recommend. They're just astounding. There they all are. As well as some more generic stuff as well, sort of like 50s and 60s sort of style jigsaws and, you know, old postcards and retro memorabilia, that sort of thing. Exactly what you would expect. But, I mean, in summary, all I can say is definitely do, if you're in the London area and you like this sort of stuff, you'd be crazy not to go, because as you can see, you know, there's so much to see, and the displays do change. I think it's fantastic, and you know, only £10 to get in, which for London prices I think is really, really good value for money. I don't think you're going to go far wrong. So yeah, do head on over to the website and get yourself some tickets, because it's fantastic. As I said, there is a dedicated Facebook page. They are on social media and they've got their own website, so do go and check that out. But yeah, I shall definitely be going back there again in a few years' time and seeing what's changed, because it's really something. So there you go. Thanks very much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed this little tour of the Museum of Brands. Definitely a place that you're going to want to visit if you enjoy the stuff that's on my channel. If you haven't already, do please hit that subscribe button, and do please give the video a thumbs up. And I'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.